What's something creepy that has happened to you that you still occasionally think about to this day? When I was around 11, I was at softball practice, and for whatever reason, the practice ended early, so I had to wait at the park for my grandpa to come and pick me up. I ended up having to wait alone for about 30 minutes, because I didn't have a cell phone to call and tell my grandpa that practice ended early. I remember sitting on the swings when an adult man, in his 30s or 40s, came and sat down next to me. He asked if he knew me, and I said no, and he told me that I must just have one of those pretty faces that feel recognizable to anybody. I remember feeling happy about the compliment, and I kept talking to him. Eventually he told me that he had his car with him and that he could drive me home to my grandparents' house so that they didn't have to worry about picking me up and I wouldn't have to wait any longer. Being 11, I didn't think anything of this and proceeded to get into this stranger's car. Luckily, my grandpa showed up just in time, and I remember seeing his car and jumping out to meet him. The stranger sped off without talking to my grandpa, and that was the last I ever heard about it. This is such a vivid memory for me, and I often find myself thinking about what would have happened to me and what a different person I would be today if my grandpa hadn't shown up when he did. Pretty sure I almost got kidnapped when I was a kid. I was 10 years old walking home from school, and an elderly couple driving by stopped and asked me for directions. They were looking for the street I was walking towards, so I pointed them in that direction. Even though my directions were very clear, both were acting confused and asked if I can get in the car and guide them there, and then they would drive me home. I told them it was fine. My house was right here. I lied. They were pressuring, guilting me a lot, and being too nice about wanting to drive me home. It gave me a really weird feeling in my stomach. So I pretended to walk towards a house that wasn't mine, and they drove off. This happened when I was 7. I was walking downtown with my dad, who was buying a CD. We used to go to the record store and he'd chat music with the workers, and I'd play on the Sega Dreamcast. I remember there was a guy watching me play, and it looked like he was crying. He was just kind of staring at me. But because I was 7 and had vidya, I didn't think much of it. About 20 minutes later, there was a bunch of people gathering outside, so we went out to see what the commotion was about. The guy who was crying was now on top of the roof, standing on the ledge. He screamed, "This is for you, Daniel." It was my name, and jumped. My dad put his entire body over mine to prevent me from seeing it, but the guy who jumped died. I thought about it every day for over 20 years. Skip ahead to about 5 years ago. I'm now at a Christmas staff party, drinking heavily with my team. A guy on said team and I have heart-to-hearts about our pasts, and he tells me that he is bisexual. However, he hasn't been with a man in 20 years. He used to date a man behind his girlfriend's back who committed suicide when he wouldn't leave her. Co-worker's name is Daniel. He was in the crowd with me. 2 strangers forever changed together, but 20 years in the past. This may not be creepy to some, but it haunted me for most of my life. When I was 10 years old, I lived in the middle of rural Alabama. We had some odd neighbors. Being curious kids, my friend and I followed my neighbor and his son and daughter one day when they left their house and walked into the woods. I was very familiar with the area because it was back when kids could roam free until the street lights came on. Anyway, We trailed them for about 2 miles, through the woods, across an old cemetery, and down a railroad. They stopped at a clearing beside the tracks, and my friend and I hid opposite of them and watched. They started digging and kept pulling up bones and putting them in a bucket. We got scared and bolted. I immediately told my parents, but they didn't believe me. I'm 32 and remember that day clearly. Smoking a blunt with the guy who had and murdered a friend of mine the previous evening. We were all hypothesizing what had happened while the psycho who had done it was casually trying to plant disinformation. Cops talked to him later that day, but he wasn't arrested for a few more. My friend planned his ex's murder. He hosted a D&D game weekly for the 5 of us. For 2 weeks he told us to move our stuff as he was going to do spring cleaning. He forgot to do it the first week. Then the second week he did it. The time we gamed after that, he got a call from the cops saying his ex was missing, and he told them he didn't know anything about it. They found her car later that same night. The cops checked the security cameras of the area back-traced when it showed up, the day she went missing, who got out of the car, and where they went, which was someone of a similar build as him getting into his truck. The cameras showed him dropping off the truck earlier that day before she went missing. That following week he got swatted. They had 48 hours to search his house and truck. A month later, they used her cell phone pings and his truck GPS to tie it together, and found her body. He was arrested. She went missing in late August, and they found her body in late September as well. He has been in jail since then. I think about it daily, having sat across a table from him every week for 7 years. He threatened me with a pipe wrench once. I think he used that to kill her. I moved into a shared house, and my housemate told me half the house had burned down and been rebuilt, and the ghost of the old man who died in the fire visited them. I never had any experience of the old man, but when half asleep, I'd very clearly feel a cat or two jump onto my bed, settle down and purr. It happened often. It was quite chilled out and I didn't mind. I would hear the distinctive thump of a cat jumping off the bed from time to time, but there was never a physical cat there. Once in that house, but a different bedroom, I had a terrifying lucid dream in which a possum, cat-like hand claw, was coming up from inside of my bed, clawing my thigh. It hurt so much I thought I might be gouging myself in my sleep, but woke up unharmed. Months later, I moved out and met the landlord, who lived a few doors down, to return keys, etc. I said something like, "Must have been scary when the house burned down and killed the owner. Were they living here at the time?" He said, "Oh no. The owner was fine, he got out. But he had about a dozen cats, and several of them died in the fire. I'm pretty sure I was sharing my bed with ghost cats. Not sure what the story was with the dream, but I've had a couple of lucid dreams in my time, and they have always been incredibly scary." I was camping in the Simpson Desert on a multi-day trip. It was a very remote location. We hadn't planned on stopping at this point, but it was getting late, and one of the trailers had blown a tire, so we decided to repair it and then call it a day. Being so remote, there aren't any signs for anything, but according to our map, the land we were on was military, probably for training and stuff. We didn't think much of it at the time, but I dare say we shouldn't have been there. Anyways, it did add to the eerie, remote, and desolate feeling in the area. I remember after dinner we were all stargazing, There were so many meteorites and satellites whizzing around. It was fantastic. I remember watching one satellite move very slowly, much slower than the rest. Then I noticed another, not far from it, moving very slowly in the same direction. I pointed it out to the group, and we were all watching these two slow satellites almost follow each other. Then the first one just made this hard right turn, and we were all like, what the hell? Then the one behind it did the same thing, and they continued to follow each other before both turning again. It really fucked with me. I couldn't explain it at the time, and it was so bizarre. I have no idea what it was. I'm not one to put much heed into conspiracies or aliens or the like, but it fucked with me for sure. The only logical conclusion I can come to, and it does help me sleep a little better at night, is that they were geostationary satellites changing altitudes or orbits. But I'm no space expert. That's the best I've come up with. I have no clue what I saw that night. When I was in 3rd grade, I was home alone with my quadriplegic grandma from after school until my mom came home. One day the phone rings, and I answer it, and an unfamiliar man's voice says, "Hey, did you just get home from school?" I say, "Yeah. Who is this?" Instead of answering me, he started asking things like, "Do you ever touch yourself? Do you like to look at girls?" Being in 3rd grade, of course, I was like, "Nope," and hung up pretty quick. I told my parents, but nothing ever came of it. I still wonder to this day who it was, how they knew my name and my whereabouts. This was back on a corded landline with no caller ID either. I had a priest ask me if I touched myself while I was in the confessional. I was 9 years old at the time. I never went to confession again. Instead, have myself my own penance, and lied about going for years. I told my mom as an adult. Too bad I didn't say anything earlier. We had a priest who was accused of much wrongdoing and was moved out of the parish and went on to do it some more. I took an Uber at around 11 p.m. to get to my house. Halfway through, he started taking random turns into smaller streets, citing traffic. We weren't even moving towards my destination at this point. I politely asked him to follow the directions that Google was suggesting, to which he asked me to shut up. He then ended the trip in the Uber app, but wouldn't stop the car or drop me off. This happened in India, where the police are next to useless. I had pepper spray with me. I'm a guy. My friends used to laugh about how I always carry that thing everywhere. I started spraying at his direction. He crashed the car. I ran out. Here's what I still think about. Uber takes away the SOS option after the driver ends the trip. The driver knows where you live, so even if you take any real action, he could still harm you. The worst part was no one really gave a shit. When I told my parents or my friends, they always find a way to blame me for it. Maybe I was rude to him. Maybe I overreacted. Made me understand what millions of women and men go through after much more serious trauma. I was about 12 years old and I was playing hide and seek. I was hiding behind a tree, but it was also next to a road. Two guys pulled up in a car and asked if I wanted to see their dog. I said sure. Then they said it was in the back seat and I would have to go into the car to see it. At that point I was getting a bad feeling, so I said, never mind. They insisted one more time for me to see it in the back seat, and I said no. Sometimes I wonder where I would be now if I was stupid enough to do it, and how terrifyingly easy it is to lure other kids into that situation. I used to spend a lot of time walking through the woods and fields by my mum's house, and noticed a path one day that I hadn't seen before. I was listening to music following down this path as the trees around became more dense. You could tell it wasn't often people walked down there anymore. I remember it being more of mud or gravel trail. At this point, I was deep in the woods, hadn't seen another person for a long time, and shaded by the leaves of the trees. I don't know what made me notice at first, but I think I smelt the smoke. I stopped on the path, and maybe 5 meters away to my left in the trees was a small fire that had obviously been stamped out in a hurry, still burning embers and smoke, so it had been done only a few moments before. Cue me realizing there wasn't anyone around that I'd seen, and that whoever had stamped out the fire was hiding in the trees somewhere. I have never felt a gut feeling to run like I did in that moment, straight back the way I came, and did not look behind me until I was back into the main woodland with people around. We'll never know if I was paranoid and it was nothing, or if I avoided something bad that day. I grew up in a decently rural area about 40 minutes outside a city. One of my neighbors had to call the cops once because someone was back on their property late at night and had started a fire. Cops show up and arrest a man who had murdered his girlfriend and was trying to burn the body. Dumbass pulled off the road thinking he was in the middle of nowhere, and was actually only like 50 feet from the back porch of one house and in view of multiple. But yeah, when I would jog by that stretch of road, I'd run a little faster. I was living in a townhouse years ago, and one night it was just me and my roommate's 2 dogs. Dogs start going crazy for about a minute, then calm down. I go outside and look around but don't see or hear anything. It was a really safe, quiet, uneventful neighborhood. I just figured the dogs heard an animal or something. I go to bed, and in the morning open the door and walk outside to see a swarm of cops at the house behind ours. Turns out the neighbor murdered his wife with a frying pan. I don't know if that's what the dogs heard, but I wish I'd had some instinct to call the cops or something. The thing that makes me shiver is that the guy was always so sweet to the pups anytime me or my roommate walked them. I had a stalker in college. Had to move dorm rooms and building 4 times in the middle of the night. Friends would help me get to my dorm by pretending we were going to theirs and making sure no one was around when I'd go into mine. He found 2 of the dorms and left notes in my room. It's been over 11 years, and I live in a completely different state. But every once in a while, I get the feeling I'm being watched and panic. When I was maybe 10, I was over at a friend's house hanging out. Her neighbor was out of town, and my friend was feeding the cat while they were gone. So my friend and I went over to feed the cat. Immediately upon opening the door, we heard someone walking upstairs. They were loud, heavy, slow footsteps. They didn't even sound human. My friend and I just looked at each other and sprinted back to her house. The worst part was, we told her mom, and the mom didn't believe us and made us go back and finish feeding the cat alone. We were terrified but did it. When the neighbor came back, they found that their house had been broken into. When I was in middle school, my girlfriends and I rode the bus home most days. The bus driver was this older guy who was super nice and fun and would allow us to play whatever radio station we wanted. And he would drop us girls off at home last so we could dance around on the bus. I remember he would let us stand at the front of the bus while he drove, and he would purposely swerve to make us fall on top of him. I remember thinking it was weird, but it wasn't until I got older that I realized how wrong that all was. I decided to Google his name and found that he is a convicted sex offender and is currently incarcerated. Scary part is when I think back, he obviously knew where I lived. And I remember there were several times when he'd drive past my house on the days I wouldn't ride with him. Keep in mind, driving past my house was out of the way of his normal route, so it was intentional. When my friend and I were 17, we used to work in a Pizza Hut together. We were closing up one weekend, so it was about 11 p.m. by the time we shut down and were ready to lock up. When we walked out to her car, there was an old lady sitting in her front passenger seat. My friend opened the driver door and asked the old lady before getting in, "Can I help you?" The old lady said, "I just need a ride home." So we tell her that we just have to go back inside and call our moms to tell her we'll be late. We go back inside the store and lock the door and call the police. Within 10 minutes, the police are there arresting her. Turns out it was actually a 47-year-old man dressed up as an old lady. They found drugs and a knife on his body. A dude in a yellow Ford Pinto offered my brother and I some candy when we were young, but we refused and walked away. Good thing, because it was child serial killer Wesley Allen Dodd.